How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Happily Never After show. I'm your host, Kate Mollison, and I'm here with a very special guest this week. We have Dr. Karen Kramer, the author of Healthy Grief and a grief expert. Welcome, Dr. Karen. It's so great to have you on the show.
So great to be here, Kate. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, so let's get started for the listeners and give them a little bit of background about you and about your book. Tell me how you got into grief work.
Oh, well, there was a period of time about 12 years ago when I just lost it. And for those of you who are watching, don't know me, this is not my norm, but I just lost it. I had one of those days, seriously, Kate, I was screaming and yelling at my kids and my husband. I was hanging up on my mom. I was cussing out my brothers. Again, far from my norm. And I'll tell you a bit about what led up to that day. But what happened after that is I did what I thought any good person could do when looking at the aftermath that I left with my whole family. And I thought, okay, I need to go see a therapist, which, by the way, as I'm continuing my story, recognize both therapy and medical professionals are there to support us. This is my story. So I want to be very clear on that as I continue with my story.
I love that.
I want to be clear on this.
You know what? I'm a firm believer. Everyone should have a therapist, but it's everyone's personal choice. So I love that you touch on that.
And the fact that there are various different ways. So here, I'm going to talk about the therapist first, but my point too is there are also various different ways to be able to process through what you're going through. So for me, I went to see the therapist who, after 45 minutes, ended up looking at me, and I think she was also newly minted. So let's put that in there. A new therapist was looking at my background. Little green, looked at my background, looked at all my experience of 30 years and leadership development and coaching myself, degrees and all that. And she looked at me and she goes, yeah, and I explained everything that led up to that day. She goes, yeah, I think you have situational anxiety. Don't you think you have situational anxiety? To which I'm like, I don't even know what that is. Okay. So I walked out a 45-minute therapy session being labeled, sent on to anxiety group, don't remember much about it. And then came home and then had another mini meltdown. So I'm like, okay, maybe, I was in my early 40s at that time. So I thought, well, maybe it's hormonal. So I went to see my doctor, and sure enough, within 2 minutes, she cut me off from my story and started prescribing me drugs. Okay, again, medical professionals are there to help. I'm always into, if you have a nail, you're going to look for the hammer to fix it, right? So I was going to a medical professional to fix what was going on, and she was doing the best she could with what she had to prescribe what she had to minimize the symptoms.
Sure.
Then I came home discouraged, which, by the way, I don't take medication. I barely take ibuprofen or anything like that. It's vitamins. So I rejected that at that time.
Mm.
And my husband's like, yeah, that fancy destination spa that you've had your eye on, the one where you can go away for like a week, which the hint was, here, Karen, go
Go
away
away.
for a while. We need you to like
That's a loving husband right there when he sends you away.
I know, it's like, we know you want this. Let's go away. And Kate, it was wonderful. I had 7 days away, exercise, healthy food, facials, massages, acupuncture, like all the wonderful things. Then, within 2 hours of being home, I was bickering with my then loving husband again. And it had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me. Why do I share that story is because what happened on that day that I had my mini breakdown, if you want to call it that, was I was calling up my mom because I had just put my beloved 16-year-old cat to sleep, which in and of itself is a form of grief. But what had happened was a month prior to that, I had laid to rest my 90-year-old father. And I had not dealt with my grief at that time because I needed to be the one who planned the celebration of life and deal with all the trust details and take care of mom and pay the bills and do everything, which was all about avoiding my grief. So when I then had to make the decision to put my 16-year-old beloved cat to sleep, that's when my grief started happening. And then when I made that call, it was just a critical, one of those issues that kind of like, would have irritated me a little bit in the moment, but I would have gotten over. It was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And then I just went into this rage. So that's what started me on my path, Kate, that story there. But really recognizing as I was working with my own clients and doing my own healing, that there are various different ways. Therapy is one of them, medical is one of them, to be able to process through and be able to face grief. However, in my case, none of those were recognizing that I was actually going through grief. It was just around labeling or numbing my symptoms or temporarily distracting me from my symptoms that were going on and not dealing with what's underneath. So when working with my clients, I found as I was releasing what was underneath their own grief, from sexual molestation to a divorce to a suicide of a loved one, that all of those were not only helping them release, but also the physical ailments that were settling in their body were also starting to release, i.e., heal and come back to balance. So that's the framework behind healthy grief, is recognizing what grief is. It's more than just death and dying. It's in every form of various different types of grief, which I'll come back to the definition of that in a moment. And also to recognize unprocessed grief will settle in the body. So I wanted to provide people a simple and easy framework that you can use, whether you are a 2-year-old to 102, to be able to
like Legos.
And he's like Legos, helpful and
9 to 99, you know.
Yeah. And also the 30 grief survivor stories that are in there. So people
so
can
powerful to have that
something
you can resonate with and connect with and feel heard and validated. But as you're talking and I'm hearing you, what really sticks out for me on the other side of it, right? Having lost my husband, is you don't realize how much other trauma, as resolved as you think it may be, that the loss of a spouse or of a relationship that is so intrinsic to your identity, whether it be your cat, your husband, your sister, your father, that relationship is intrinsic to your identity. And when you lose that relationship, all of that other stuff that existed underneath them and prior to them comes up to the surface. And I go to therapy and I say to my therapist all the time, I'm like, I came here to talk about my dead husband, not about my mother. So, and she laughs at me, but it's very true, like even the insignificant little things that just weren't dealt with and packed away or accepted, or you go, oh my God, and you're forced to really look at your entire trauma history under a microscopic lens. And I love that you leaned into that approach because so many people would shy away from it. And the other thing I
Yes.
hear as you talk is it's just this wild awareness that grief is a parasite in a way, and it attacks your body systemically, all of it.
Mhm.
And so all of these medical professionals and mental health professionals and who are treating you and are band-aiding it don't ever talk to each other. They don't ever work in tandem. And getting that holistic, the key to your recovery was time and space and self-care and love and really just parenting yourself in a very rudimentary way. So I find it fascinating that you are basically teaching other people how to parent themselves through grief.
Yes, and I love the way you talk about it, parenting yourself. I'm taking that down because there's so many things that you you
Well,
had
it's,
mentioned.
self-care gets misconstrued for, getting a pedicure or squeezing in that extra round of golf or eating that dessert you shouldn't have. But the reality is that's just an excuse to behave poorly. Self-care is really about parenting yourself and caring for yourself as if you were a child. How would you take care of this child who's come to you wounded, maybe physically, emotionally, and build them back up again? And it's hard to do that to ourselves, right? Like nobody's good at. So how do you overcome that barrier with people in grief who may not be attracted to wanting to parent themselves, even though they probably don't know that that's what they're doing?
Good. And in answering that question, I'm going to backtrack to something you mentioned earlier, Kate, that I want to emphasize. So remind me if I don't get back to that question, because I want to make sure. You mentioned about identity and loss of identity, which I think is critical for people to recognize. So when grief, yes, it is the death, and here we're focusing on grief specifically associated with the loss of a physical person, right? And here's where I go is that when we recognize what grief is, I expand the definition to be grief being a significant loss where you have, or a critical loss where you have a significant emotion. Let's put it that way. And I add on to that when what once was is no longer. Okay? So obviously, if it is, for example, when we've lost a physical person due to a death, that is grief. When we've lost a relationship, that is a grief. Family estrangement, career changes, empty nesters, retirees. So we can go into this. Even a loss of hopes and dreams is grief. Why do I say that? Is because when we can recognize where grief shows up in our life, even minor, if we want to call it a little g or a big G, because I know they do the little
uppercase
big
G, lowercase
thing.
G. I like that. I'm gonna note that. See, we're trading info here.
Right? It's the idea of like when I could recognize how this is showing up in my body and my mind, my thoughts, feelings, and emotions, I tend to react similar. Then when it comes to some of the big G, major grief things in my life, I can understand and recognize those because we live in a grief avoidance society. Right? You know that, Kate, but especially with the work that you're doing, I'm doing, is we're getting information out there. So it's some event which challenges our sense of identity. And here's an example. It doesn't actually need to be a physical event. It could be a mother who all of a sudden is in her late 40s and recognizing her hope and dream of being a mother may not necessarily come to be. Or it may be the Olympian who has been planning for this their entire life. Like they've lived this since they were like able to sit in front of a TV watching Olympians, and they don't make the gold. So it could be one of those where they've just lost their hope and dream, and it's psychological, but it's still a loss that we're going through. But when we recognize these little g events that happen in our life, when we don't get the school play role, we don't, the boy or the girl doesn't like us, we don't get into the class we want, our friend leaves us, our pet dies. When we can understand and experiences those little g's, then we are then able to more likely able to face those big g's that happen in our life. When grandpa passes, when our relationship ends, etc.
And our capacity to experience the little g could be nature, could be nurture, right? A little bit of both. It could be our capacity to understand it. It could be the environment in which we experienced it and the safety to experience it. So there's lots of variables, but I love the concept of those smaller g's, those lowercase g's, and embracing them and leaning into them as a training, as a driver's ed for the big g's, right? Why don't we do that more often? You touched on it. We have an avoidance, society, but I love this. This is such great information for the listeners out there. So when I want to make sure we circle back to that other question, but I'm just fascinated by how you approach this type of work, and maybe specifically with someone who has lost a spouse.
Looking for excitement? Chumba Casino is here. Play anytime, play anywhere. Play on the train, play at the store, play at home, play when you're bored. Play today for your chance to win and get daily bonuses when you log in. So what are you waiting for? Don't delay. Chumba Casino is free to play.
Experience social gameplay like never before. Go to Chumba Casino right now to play hundreds of games, including online slots, bingo, Slingo, and more. Live the Chumba life at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
They may find it hard to hear when someone says, well, my grief, is just as big. I lost a cat. How do we talk to people in grief about apples to oranges, but the same produce department? Just because you don't like chocolate cake doesn't mean I can't have any. How do we help people with those volatile emotions and that dysregulation and that lack capacity to care for themselves be palatable to the people who are trying to offer support?
Yes. And in healthy grief, I also focus on not only for the griever, but the supporter. How do we help others? And you mentioned a critical point. Like if I lost a spouse, a spouse that has passed away, and somebody else has lost their cat, it is a different produce. It's a different apples and oranges. But the big thing is, and you mentioned it right at the beginning, Kate, is the value of being seen, heard, and understood. To be seen, heard, and understood for our own grief. So let's imagine if I came to you and say, I just lost my cat, and you're like, hey, I just lost my grandpa. I can recognize that both of us are going through our own grief. Just because it's a cat versus a person doesn't mean that it invalidates the fact that I'm still going through a grief process. In fact, part of the subtitle, The Healthy Grief, is about normalizing and navigating loss in a culture of toxic positivity. So if I, for example, the two of us are here and you've just lost a physical person and I've just lost a cat, if I say to myself, oh, well, I have to disregard because it's not as important as me being there for you, then I'm actually hindering my own grief process. Right? So it can happen from that griever perspective that they devalue their own grief. So recognize it can happen in many different cases. Or the two of us are having a conversation and, and you may say, I'm not putting this on you, Kate, but I realize I set the situation up. You mean like, well, hey, Karen, you're like, I'm sorry about your cat, but I lost my a grandfather, I lost a person. Then also you're devaluing, right? My grief. So that
we're continuing to perpetuate the current climate of grief tolerance and inclusivity. If we as the grievers continue to say, well, that's not good enough when someone offers support, how do we change the landscape when it comes to being seen, heard, validated, and appropriately supported in healthy grief? So I love that you are teaching the teacher, in addition to, we have to teach grievers how to grieve. We have to teach supporters how to support we have to teach the two how to interact with each other, because that's really the missing component. They can't be in a vacuum. And it's a lot to really, the moral of the story is just it's your own story and you get to tell it and no one gets to take it away from you. But just because I don't like chocolate cake doesn't mean you don't get to have any, right? Like,
Correct.
maybe I'm just hungry. I've got chocolate cake on the brain. I don't know.
Wait, it's still morning for me. I'm working on the coffee.
It's still morning. No, it's not. I lied.
Yeah.
It's morning somewhere. Hey, you know what? Cake has breakfast ingredients in it. There's eggs, there's flour, there's milk. I'm just having a balanced breakfast. I could go off the rails. So this has got to be some pretty intense work for you, though, to carry around other people's grief, so to speak, and having experienced your own traumas and losses. How do you protect yourself and be able to continue to do this work?
A lot of energy work. So, and actually being the head coach for an organization previously that also trained other people how to do this deep work with clients, that is one of the things that I did about protecting yourself as a practitioner when working with somebody who is getting to the root cause. That's something we talked about before, is getting to the root cause of what your grief is. You may be dealing with the loss of grandpa, for example, but it may bring up, Kate, you mentioned this before, it may bring up something like associated with mom or dad. Like, let's get back to the root. And even in the work that I do, hint on the side, is sometimes the grief is not something which is within this lifetime, which is another thing that I do as a regressionist. But let's stay to the current life and get focused on that. So when working with individuals, anything can come up. So being able to set an energy bubble, and I actually don't even really set it around myself. I set it around my clients to be able to allow them to explore whatever comes up for them and truly providing that safe, secure, comfortable, nurturing, loving, and warm space for them. I've even had clients who call me the what is it, Cinderella, the godmother. Fairy godmother, or just the mother nurturing. Because when we're going through our ick, sometimes we just want to be in that space where we know we're not going to be judged at all for whatever comes up. In fact, I even talk about the difference between judgment, even self-judgment, versus curiosity. And so the questions that I have are to really allow my clients to be curious about what's coming up, not judge whatever's happened in the past, but come from a space of curiosity.
Which is so hard to do, to remove that judgment on yourself. And I think for me, that judgment shows up as logicizing. So I'll say, I think I feel, or, well, if I think about that, and I have to remember to stop thinking about how I feel so hard and just feel it. And I'm sure that you, as people are processing grief with all of its complexities, you encounter the logic versus the emotive. How do you encourage people to get back into their feelings when they're less than comfortable?
Really simple. I just hypnotize them.
Let's talk about that.
I mean, it's a flippant comment and it's true. So as I'm working with individuals, I am a hypnotherapist. So it's getting to the point where we're taking the conscious, I can't talk about this, let me talk about what I think about it. And in a safe environment, be able to allow that to go offline for just a bit. Because when we start diving down more into the unconscious and subconscious work, that's where we get to the root cause. So if I was to ask you, Kate, or anybody, like, so what's the root cause of this issue, topic, whatever you're bringing to me? You're just going to think about and tell me what you think it is. But I will then tell you what you think it is not the root cause, because it's not that which you think it is.
The brain is a funny thing. It works to protect you. So even if you're trying to do the work, it will sometimes put barriers or clouds or misinformation in front of you. And so working with the subconscious allows you to cut through all of that noise, if I understand that correctly.
It does. It does. So even giving, and I'll try to make this a short example, it's something that I share with some of my clients before we go in and do the deep work. let's imagine that we have little Susie, who's 5 years old, who had a father who came home and said, who was extroverted. Let's imagine little Susie's extroverted, and he's just really tired at the end of the day. And little Susie wants to share everything she wants with dad, like, hey, little Billy did this, and this is what happened at school. And dad says, shut up, you're too much, go to your room. Okay. And let's imagine then little Susie develops a belief that she's too much. Okay. And that for psychological safety, whenever she hears dad come home, she starts to tiptoe around and go in her room and avoid dad. So let's just imagine that situation. Now,
which is a very common, that happens all the time.
Yeah. Now, I'm also using a situation where dad's yelling, but you could also think it could be abusive. It could be other things. Okay. So you
it could be mom,
whatever that
doesn't have to be a male figure. Yep.
Mom, uncle,
any caregiver. Situation. Sure.
Yeah. An adult figure. It could be a teacher. Who knows?
Could be big brother.
Neighbor. Yes. Yes. I've actually had that too. So let's imagine that scenario, but now little Susie is 25 years old and on a date with Mr. Wonderful, right? So she's not little Susie, she's Susie as an adult, 25 years old. She's out on a date with Mr. Wonderful and she's sharing with him extrovertedly all the things that are going on and things that happen on the weekend. And Mr. Wonderful says, oh, Susie, you're too much. And just teasingly, but all of a sudden little Susie starts to like have these feelings that she's not quite sure what it is and starting to cry and starting to shut down and she's not talking. And Mr. Wonderful's like, okay, I don't know what I said or what I did. She's excusing herself. She's breaking down crying in the bathroom. Well, what happened is at an unconscious or subconscious level, that little Susie who got yelled at by dad and told she was too much came to the surface at that time. And that does not serve her.
Like she was woken up and she's now in the driver's seat. Little Susie's the one driving the van. Yep.
Exactly. So when I say our root cause.
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
How we are acting and reacting is all at the unconscious level. That's what I'm referring to. So it's not like a client's going to come to me and say, oh, I know. It's when my dad yelled at me when I was 5 years old. That's why I'm reacting this way. We don't know.
Well, and if they can tell you that, that tells me there's more work to be done. Like if they can tell you that, then it's like, what else is going on?
And that's not the root cause. Yeah. I love to use the analogy too around, you've probably heard the meme out there about like, if I'm holding a coffee cup and somebody bumps me and I get coffee on my blouse, right? Like who's to blame?
Is it their fault for bumping me? Is it my fault for spilling it? Yep. It's the cup's fault.
Yeah. It's not a fault at all. Really, it is what's in your cup. So whether it's water, tea, or coffee, if something bumps you, that's what's going to spill out. So I use that analogy with my clients, not about walking around life with bubble wrap around you going, emotionally, right? I don't want to get hurt again, so I'm never going to get in a relationship. I don't like bosses, so I'm never going to have a job that I'm going to, whatever it is, we want to protect ourselves. It's let's clean out what's in our cup, because what's in our cup is all the past traumas, triggers, and limiting beliefs.
That's what's going to make a mess.
So we're always going to have bumps in life, whether we lose somebody, whether we, any kind of bump in life, any kind of little G to big G is going to come along in our life because that's the way we learn.
Part of the human condition.
It's part of the human condition. So the more that we can clean out our proverbial cup of those past traumas, triggers, limiting beliefs, our root causes.
Keeps the level down to a normal amount and less is likely to spill out. See?
Exactly.
Now we're layering logic on top of emotional healing. It's the best of both worlds. I love this.
Yes.
So this is a really great framework that anybody can take after a loss. They don't have to be super close to the loss. They don't have to be super far out from the loss. It's just wherever it feels right in them in the process to start dealing with those things in their cup is when you're saying they can start applying these things. And I am also a personal huge fan advocate of hypnotherapy. It is the reason I'm a functional human being. I tell my therapist often, shout out to Tina.
Go Tina.
Because it really is that I'm a type A control freak and you're in your grief and it's bringing up these other things. And then those, because my things were connected to childhood, that traumatized child who tries to shore up the edges and protect yourself. And then you can't ever get anything done. And going to hypnotherapy and getting out of my own way allowed me the opportunity, because then I could reflect on it afterwards and I could logicize it afterwards and talk about, well, I think that experience was, or I feel now because, and I think that's connected to, and it allows me to kind of marry those two parts of myself, the super emotive and the logic part. And I don't know that I would have accomplished that in traditional therapy. So I love that you're out here doing the hypnotherapy work. We are almost at the end of our time together, but I do want to take some time to talk about your upcoming projects as well. I know we've been talking about your book, Healthy Grief, and I know that you have other books, hopefully, and in the works coming out. Where can people go to find you, and what's next for Dr. Karen?
Yes, so the easiest is to go to my website, drkarenkramer.com, drkarenkramer.com. And in the ribbon of that, you will see then what my update is, which in this case, you'll find the link that'll go to the trailer and everything about healthy grief. And even the GRIEF framework in there, which is an easy framework to be able to help anybody. And again, from age 2 to 102 or more, depending upon what you're going on. So that's in healthy grief. More projects. This is only the start of it. So I know I shared a lot with you, Kate. Is the next book is really looking at resilience. So beyond just grief, having something that is a grief situation, whether it's psychological or physical grief, but also how do we build a resilient life? So that next book that's coming along is on resilience. The third one is looking more at our spiritual perspective. So as a hypnotherapist, yes, I do past life regressions. I've also found the root cause in many cases, I won't say all, but many cases actually is not even in this lifetime. So the third one is really going to talk about how can we have more of a spiritually healthy life. So we are more resilient. So when we face grief situations, we have more awareness to be able to easily bounce back.
I love that.
So,
and I feel like people are probably just as hesitant to talk about their relationship with their spiritual self as they are to talk about their grief, right? Like grief is very private and we live in a society where we don't get to talk about it. And I'm sure spirituality comes into a similar way of being held. And then just imagine the work that you have with grief and then the work that you'll have with spirituality and being able to bridge that gap. Like you're really changing the landscape of the way that we understand and approach grief from ourselves, for other people. So thank you so much, Dr. Karen, for doing the work out here. I'm so excited to get to know you more and work with you and share all the things. If you could give one piece of advice to the listeners, what is something that you would impart on them?
The first thing that came to mind just as you were saying that, and I change it each time, is curiosity. I touched upon this earlier. And when we look at events that are happening around us, it is very easy for us to step in and say, how is this happening to me? Like, why is it I'm always losing my keys? Cars are bumping into me. I'm having friends like, ooh, fill in the blank. Like, why is this happening to me? And if we come from a place of curiosity on the flip side, how is this happening for me? For what purpose is this happening for me? It allows us to step into that place of curiosity. And instead of seeing a door that closes, like a relationship or the death of a loved one, for example, as something that we've lost, we no longer have, and focus more on the how is this happening for me? For example, when somebody is alive, really honoring the fact that it was amazing that that person was in my life, that I got to spend time with that person, that I had these happy memories or whatever that is for you. how is this happening for me? Be coming from a place of curiosity versus judgments, looking at our life through softer eyes is such a valuable place for us to be. You may learn much more about yourself from that perspective than you have previously.
Wow, I love it. If that's not a sound bite, I don't know what is. That was just so awesome. I think, yeah, like you really touch on how we can start to be kinder to ourselves and how we can be more loving towards ourselves and that get curious. I always say, what's the lesson here? Something tough that happens to you and you have to be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? I'm no princess. I don't need rescuing. I am a queen. Let me straighten my crown. But also, like, why did that happen? What did I need to learn? Because the universe will often give you the same lesson over and over again until you learn how to handle it. So for those of you who are going, why does this keep happening? Maybe you need to start looking at the root cause. And if you can't find the root cause, go find Dr. Kramer.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we are at the end of our time for this episode. I do want to remind everyone that you can find Dr. Kramer on her website, drkarenkramer.com, and my website as well. On Tuesdays, we wear black. Keep an eye out for all of the upcoming events and things we have going on. Until next time, with grief and gratitude, I'm your host, Kate Mollison. Have a great day, everyone.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.